Hello and welcome back to Death, Sex and Taxes. My name's Aurelia, I'm a therapist and a coach and your host for these unfiltered conversations. And today we're going there, we're talking about sex. But more than that, we're talking about shame, identity, those quiet but powerful stories that shape the way that we show up in our relationships, in our bodies and in our intimacy. Now, one of the most powerful things that I see in the therapy room is that people often come in with these stories that they don't even realise that they're carrying, let alone coming to the realisation that that story actually might not even be theirs. Our beliefs about sex, intimacy, pleasure, our body are often all shaped long before we can even consciously think about them. And from a psychosexual therapy lens, this is called sexual scripting. The implicit rules and narratives that we absorb from our culture, our friends, our communities, our families, our peer groups, the media. These scripts become the operating systems of our sexual identity, our sexual beliefs, our behaviour and our comfort levels. So I thought I'd run through you maybe some examples of what sexual scripting might sound like and how that might affect you. So you might notice yourself in some of these. So if we're looking at cultural or religious morality, some of these things might start to come into it. Sex is sinful outside of marriage, pleasure is indulgent, purity equals worthiness. And then maybe let's talk about some gendered scripts. Things like men are supposed to want sex all the time. Women shouldn't be too sexual or assertive. Being sexually open makes you easy or dangerous. And now if I talk about family silence or discomfort, if you grew up in a household where sex was never mentioned, it was the thing that you weren't allowed to talk about. It was never mentioned or it was hushed when it was. Maybe there were uncomfortable tones around it. You might have internalized that message that sex is something shameful, even if no one ever said that directly to you. And then we move on to the media, whether that's mainstream media or pornographic messaging. And this can often shape what sex should look like. Maybe setting unrealistic or performative standards, that sex should always be spontaneous and erotic, orgasmic, and always looking hot. In this context, there's rarely ever room for awkwardness, consent conversations, slowness, or the emotional nuance that goes with it. And so these types of things often live within us. We embody them, we take them on as our own. These will live in your subconscious mind, in your nervous system, in your muscle memory, in your associations. And all of these narratives will affect whether you feel safe to feel desire, to say yes or to say no. And it's really interesting because most people don't ever question these kinds of things. And that's often because they are so deep, they're programmed so deep that they're not really your conscious mind that is thinking about them. You just operate sexually in a certain way and you think that's how you are. Well, oftentimes it's the beliefs that you've been given. Like, you're not walking around thinking that this is my inherited sexual shame, or this is my inherited shame around assertiveness. Like, these thoughts aren't coming into your mind. But that dialogue might show up in a different way, something a bit more tangible. Maybe you avoid eye contact when you're asking for what you want, or feel guilty after you pleasure yourself, or never initiating because it just feels too vulnerable. So psychosexually, the work is around mapping the story and then reclaiming your script. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how shame is showing up. In therapy, I often say that shame thrives in silence. And when it comes to sexuality, silence is actually where it does the most damage. Shame shows up in 1,000 quiet, different little ways. Sometimes loud, but often so subtle that you don't even notice it, or that you don't realise it until someone gives you the language to be able to speak about it. So I'm going to give you some examples from a psychosexual perspective that might give you language for some of the experiences that you're having. So disassociation and numbing with sex. You check out midway even if everything is consensual. You might feel numb, disconnected from your body, or like you're performing rather than experiencing. This is a common nervous system response when shame or past trauma is present. Now let's talk about avoidance of self-touch or solo pleasure. People often feel guilt or embarrassment for masturbation, even if intellectually you believe that it's fine. And this one will often trace back to early messaging around the idea that self-pleasure is dirty, secretive, or morally wrong. Now, on the flip side of this, you can have hypersexuality, and you can kind of use it as a shield. And some people will engage in a lot of sex not out of desire, but to feel validated, loved, and worthy. And it can become a way to manage anxiety or shame by controlling how you're being seen, kind of like a survival strategy, but dressed up with confidence. Then you might have overthinking and control, wanting to get sex right, worrying constantly about how you look. Is your partner satisfied? If you're doing it well enough. And this is often more rooted in the idea in shame of performance, comparison, or fear of inadequacy. And then we have withholding or withdrawing. Maybe you never initiate. Maybe you'll never talk about fantasy. Maybe you fear asking for what you really want. Because oftentimes the deeper belief and the deeper fear is if they see me, they will leave me. Or this part of me is unlovable. And in therapy, we don't pathologize these things. We just get curious. And pathologize means to not make something abnormal. We're just looking at it, we're just noticing it, and we're getting curious about why it's there. Because every shame-based behavior is actually an intelligent adaptation. You see, it's your nervous system, your subconscious, trying to keep you safe. Safe from exposure, safe from past hurt, safe from rejection. Your body's trying to keep you safe, even if you're not consciously aware of it. So for this type of therapy, we look at things like where it started, how it protected you, what's it costing you now, and what a new self-authored story could be. It's never about fixing you. It's about reconnecting to yourself, reclaiming pleasure, rewriting the narrative, and doing all of this with compassion and not pressure. And so let's talk a little bit more about how you go through this process, what healing your script looks like. And shame can feel like a life sentence, but it's not. It's a wound, not a personality trait, and all wounds can be healed. And for psychosexual therapy, the healing of shame is rarely about getting more confident in bed or learning new positions. It's about reconnection to your body, your voice, your story, and your safety. And so here's what that might look like in practice. Firstly, making the unconscious conscious. Before you can change a story, you need to see it clearly. And therapy helps name the beliefs and scripts that you might have inherited, many of which you've internalized to believe that they're true. Things like, I shouldn't need sex. It's bad to want attention. If I enjoy this too much, I'll be judged. I have to earn affection. Those types of things that might come up. And sometimes just naming these beliefs outside can actually be incredibly powerful. In a space where it's non-judgmental, where those beliefs are allowed to land, they're allowed to come out into the air. And I say this because, like I said, shame can fester in silence. It can fester in the secrecy. So when it comes out and it's shared, that often starts to alleviate that sense of shame. And it begins to loosen the minute that those words are spoken. Secondly, reconnecting with our bodies. Shame can disconnect us from our bodies in lots of different ways. Through tension, numbness, disassociation, or maybe hypervigilance. So healing can't just be cognitive. This has to be embodied. And ways to do embodiment can be things like breath work, to ground yourself and gently regulate your nervous system. Things like somatic noticing, gently tuning into the feelings of pleasure to resistance, to all the sensations that are present at the moment. And maybe movement or touch exercises if appropriate, to rebuild that sense of agency and safety within your own body. So the body isn't the enemy. The body is actually the place where the healing is happening for this type of work. It's within you. It's what's holding you. And sometimes simply learning to stay with your body rather than against it can actually start to cause quite a big shift. Another thing is finding your voice. Many people really struggle to articulate what they need, what they want, what they feel, especially in the intimate settings. And this is where voice work matters. This can look like naming desires and boundaries without shame, exploring consent and communication as an ongoing process and not just a one-off moment, and getting curious about what you actually want and not what you think you should want. Your voice is a tool for liberation. You don't need it to be loud, but you do need it to be honest. This isn't about healing to be performative. This is about being real. And this is where we move towards integration over perfection. We're not aiming to become these sexually perfect beings. There's no end point, there's no gold badge, there's no fully healed sticker. Growth just looks like noticing that shame voice and choosing curiosity rather than collapse. Catching yourself in a pattern and pausing instead of pushing through. Being able to say, I'm not sure, or this feels tender, and choosing to stay away. The work is in these micro moments, not the big ones. When you stay kind to yourself in the face of old stories. When you let someone see a part of you that you used to hide. When you let go of performance and come back to presence. These are all the types of things that are integration over choosing performance. And so much of what we carry isn't ours, but we live as if it is. And your shame is not a sign that there's something wrong with you. It's a sign that something got buried. And this work is more about helping unbury it, gently, slowly, and with compassion. So as we come to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with this. So much of what you believe about yourself, your desires, your body, your worth, might not even have come from you. It might have come from the stories that you've inherited, the culture you grew up in, or maybe even the silences that were around you. And yet these stories are shaping us so much. How we show up in relationships, how we speak about sex, and how safe we feel to be fully seen. But here's the thing, those stories aren't set in stone. They can be rewritten, they can be softened. And you don't have to do that process alone. Whether you're conscious of it and have carried shame for years, or you're just now noticing its quiet presence in the background of your life, you're not broken, you're human. And healing doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means returning to who you've always been beneath that shame. So here's a little invitation for you for this week. What's one belief about sex, intimacy, or identity that you grew up with that you are now questioning? Can you name it? Can you write it down? Could you maybe talk to someone about it? Maybe even start a new story, one that feels like yours. And if this episode stirred something up in you, let me know. Message me, leave a comment, a DM, or share your story. This podcast is about starting real conversations, not perfect ones, real ones. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss the next episode. And if you think someone in your life needs to hear this, please send it their way. You never know who might be ready to hear a new story too. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week. Shh, don't talk about it.